Hi, now we're going to take a look at the program that connects to the same SQL Server database server, the same database within that database server, but this time it's going to call up a stored procedure, pass the stored procedure a parameter, cause the database engine to execute the code in the stored procedure, and then take the result set and return it back to the list box the way we saw done in the previous example. Okay, so whereas here we created an SQL string, passed the string to the database server, had that string then executed by the database engine. This time we're going to be calling up instead a stored procedure and passing a parameter, but otherwise it's going to look very much like the previous program. So if I run it, nothing happens immediately. There's nothing in the form load event. If I put in a known primary key value for the employee table and execute, I get 3 columns of output. So let's see what's going on under the hood. If I close this all up and go to to form 3, then in the form load event, nothing. If I look at the button click event, I see very little code. I've got try catch set up. I tried to make this a little bit more bulletproof than the previous program in that I check for a string length, and if the string length has a value of greater than 0, then I process it, and if I can translate it into an integer value, it stays in the try path, and then I call up a private method and pass it that converted value from the text box. So let's take a look at the private method build and display, and so build and display looks like this. There is a try catch block here, so I've got that try catch nested, and so this wouldn't necessarily have had to have been nested. I'm not sure why I did that, because I'm already in the try block, but nevertheless the code's protected with try catch. I'm going to create the same 3 variables that I used previously, and I will instantiate the connection class. Okay, and you'll notice that the connection string looks like it did previously. I'm going to instantiate the command class, and you'll notice that the call to the constructor is different. For those of you that have taken CPSC 1500, you'll notice that that is an overloaded constructor. There's several different ways that that constructor can be invoked, and this particular way creates a command object but doesn't pass it anything. It doesn't give it anything to parse. I create a variable that I will eventually use to reference my ADO.NET data reader once it's instantiated, but I declare the variable and don't immediately instantiate it. Then I create a connection. I assign to the command object's connection property. So I'm going to be wiring up the connection object not with data that I pass to the constructor the way I did previously, but by doing assignments to properties of the command object. So the command object has a connection property, and I'm going to take my active connection here, assign that object as the connection property. It has a command text property where I give the name of the stored procedure that I want to execute. So this has to be exactly the way the stored procedure is spelled in SQL Server. and I have a command type property, and I will then assign a value of command type stored procedure, so it knows to execute a stored procedure as opposed to a function or some other type of script. And then for that stored procedure, I will have a parameters property that will be populated with an add with value method. Okay, so in this case I only have one parameter, so I only need one line that looks like this. On the other hand, if I had two parameters, I would have to provide a second line that looks similar to this, except the string value that I use with the add with value method needs to be the exact name of the parameter that's used with the stored procedure. So the first argument needs to be the exact name of the parameter used with the stored procedure, and the second argument needs to be the value that I want to populate it with. So in this case, I'm going to populate it with P employee ID, which happens to be the parameter that is used with this private method. So that's the user's text box data converted to integer. In my case, when I demonstrated with a value of 1, it converted text 1 in the button click event, and then called up the build and display method, passing it the integer equivalent of what I input. Okay, so that's my program input that gets assigned to the parameter. And again, if I had more than one parameter, I would simply provide a line like this for every parameter, with each of these add with value strings showing two arguments, the parameter name and the input that you want to send to the parameter, the argument value there. And at that point then I've wired up my command object by assigning to various properties, and I would then open the connection. At this point I can begin executing the SQL. So when I use the command object's execute reader method, it's going to have the server execute the stored procedure, and it's also going to create the data reader object. Okay, data reader object that was declared with this variable up here at the top. Okay, so at this point I've got an object, and I have executed the stored procedure on the server. The result set is available to me, and at this point I'm going to drop into a while loop and begin row by row reading from the result set using the data reader object's read method. And again, that's a return type method that's going to return true or false, and when it finally runs out of rows in the result set, it will return a value of false and kick out of the while loop, at which point the list box will be completely populated with this formatted data that that's going to correspond with the SQL statement that was executed. Okay, so everything I had mentioned previously about being able to reference columns and so forth are going to be true here as well. So every column is referenced by an index value. And once I have populated the list box and I exit the loop, I end the try path, and you'll notice this time I didn't close my connection. I'm using local variables, so very shortly, whenever the method ends, those variables are going to go out of scope and lifetime. So the resources that they're using are going to be freed up. And I've got a catch path set up with a way of catching any exceptions. So if anything goes wrong, I'll be able to get an exception message from the server. And if you've taken CPSC 1500, we did this in CPSC 1500 as well. So my catch path will display a string that corresponds with an error message that's returned from the system if it happens to take that path. And that can be very enlightening to see the kind of information you get from the system. Okay, so that is pretty much it. I want to take a look at that stored procedure. So you notice that in the output when I ran it there were 3 columns. Consequently, when I reference the columns within the data reader, I have column 0, 1, 2, okay? And that means that my stored procedure, which is proc HR front end op 3, should involve a select statement with an inner join that's going to project 3 columns. So again, that's proc HR front end op 3, and if I launch SQL Server, log in, look at the stored procedures, might want to do it this way, and here's my stored procedure. If I look at the program code behind this, I see that it's just an inner join of the employee and the depend to table, and that I'm projecting 1, 2, and 3 columns. Okay, so fairly simple, straightforward SQL. And you'll notice my where clause uses the parameter value and that the parameter name is @imp_id. If I close that up, in creating the command object and wiring up the command object, I had to give it in the parameters add with value method 2 arguments. First one being the name, the actual name of the parameter in the stored procedure, which again was @imp_id. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense, and it's really not that much different than what I explained with the first program. It uses a data reader, it connects to a database. So the details of the connection object are the same. The command object is treated differently. So whereas before when I instantiated the command object, I passed 2 parameters, the SQL string as a first argument, and the name of the connection object as the second argument. This time I don't do that, but rather I provide similar component information, this time though by way of assignment statements. And I told you previously that part of learning how to write a program front end, connect to a database, involves learning all the variations that can be done with ADO.NET. You're seeing just a little bit of it, but hopefully enough that you get the idea that there's various ways that I can write these statements with ADO.NET to configure the objects, and the way I write them is going to be dependent upon what I'm trying to do. It's kind of task specific. And then the other thing that should be noted about this program is that it uses stored procedure, which is really a much better way of doing things, because it provides an added layer of security, and it also allows that program code that has to execute on the database server to be managed, to be stored and managed and compiled on the server, which means that it's going to be easier to maintain and it's going to execute more efficiently. So that is pretty much everything I want to show you regarding the use of the data reader, the ADO.NET data reader, and then you'll have an assignment to do that requires that you understand all this.